You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Margaret George.
Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. Author interviews, writing advice, the very best people in writing today. Join me each and every weekday. You can find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. Before we get started, let's talk about some sponsors today. Writing novels is hard, but Dabble makes it easier. Dabble replaces your word processor, doing what it can't. Dabble organizes your manuscript, story notes, and plot. It simplifies story, leaving more room in your brain to create. And after all, that is what being a writer is all about. Dabble was built from the ground up specifically for writing novels. It takes minutes to learn, and it makes writing a joy. See how Dabble will revolutionize the way you write with a free trial at www.dabblewriter.com. Also, thanks to our friend Mindy Tarquini and her book, Deepest Blue. From critically acclaimed author Mindy Tarquini comes a magical tale told sun to sun, moon to moon, heart to heart, and midsummer to midsummer. For fans of Paulo Coelho and Neil Gaiman, in an enchanted city seen only at twilight, a resentful second son unlocks secrets which could cause his world's star to finally set. Publishers Weekly calls Deepest Blue a haunting, lyrical fantasy dealing with love, loss, and political turmoil. Kirkus Reviews said there's a lot to like about Tarquini's Italian-inflected fantasy story, starting with her often lyrical prose. Deepest Blue by Mindy Tarquini. Thanks also to our friend Joe Leonardi, who is sponsoring the show. He has a series of novellas called The Damaged and Broken Collection. Tortured and Tormented, Creating a School Shooter is the first one. War Springs Eternal is the second. And then the third in the series called Is Suicide Painless? Joe is a fantastic storyteller, and he's telling stories that connect on a heart level, that make us look at the world around us and the crazy things that are happening, and maybe instill a little empathy into the way we look at the things going on. We're going to talk about them more this month as it goes on, but Joe Leonardi, The Damaged and Broken Collection, there's a link to it in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Margaret George on the show with me today. Margaret has a fantastic new book. It's called The Splendor Before the Dark, a novel of the Emperor Nero. And I'll tell you what, Margaret, I knew virtually nothing about Nero when I started this book, except for, the kind of caricatures that we all know about Nero. So this book really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I'm super excited to talk about it. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of people, it's funny, he's sort of a household name, but most people, we don't know much about him except all those cartoons about him fiddling while Rome burned.
Exactly. And I have I'm going to ask you about that particular scene in just a few minutes, but before we get to that, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, this may be too long for you.
No.
But when I was a little girl, my father was in the Foreign Service, the U.S. Foreign Service, and we were stationed overseas. And we, when I was 7, 8, and 9, and we were living in Israel, and I loved reading, but I couldn't possibly get enough English language books there to read. I would read through all these books really fast, and there was at that point, because it was really early in Israel's life as a country. They'd only been an independent country for 2 years when we got there. So, there were no libraries to go and get stuff from. And I thought, well, I sort of started writing my own books because it was almost like I would make them up. And I made these line tablets, and I wrote. That meant I couldn't do very many revisions either because they're all attached. But that's really what started it. Was I wrote them for my own entertainment, and of course that kept me really busy. But I think 7, 8, and 9 is when a lot of kids start that writing. I mean, a lot of people that turn out to be writers. I still have them, by the way. I still read them sometimes. And I think, this isn't bad. The spelling isn't very good. The spelling was terrible. But I thought, hey, this isn't bad at all. So that's really how I got started.
I love that. I love that so much. What were the kinds of stories that really captured your imagination back then?
Oh, I was in the horse phase that little girls go through. And I had all these books about the Wild West and wild horses and stampedes and cowboys and I think the whole thing about horses. I don't know if kids do that anymore, but at the time a lot of kids were so into horses. And I think really there was a whole series of these horse books, and many publishers put out series of them. I actually found one of them the other day that from when I was a child, and I want to reread it and see what was it that fascinated me so much about it at the time. What was it that hooked me?
On your website, you've got these great pictures of you as a child, with your father traveling around the world, and there's a picture of you in front of the pyramids. Did this time and those experiences that you had, did those deepen your love of history that would later come out in the kinds of books that you wrote?
Oh, I think so. And again, I think that living in Israel was just so pivotal in my formation as a person, because I went to this school where we were studying history. Although I was only third and fourth grades there, I still have those books. It was amazing. We were studying history, and we started out with Hammurabi and all that, and we got up to Egypt, and there's whole sections of that book. I can't believe it. Third graders were expected to read this book, but I loved it, and I really wanted to go to Egypt, and we were so close to Egypt,
Right.
But at the time, of course, Israel and Egypt had no diplomatic relations, and you couldn't go from one to the other. And my father, being at the embassy in Tel Aviv, was able to concoct some kind of business in Cairo. He had to go to the embassy there. So he took me. Wasn't that a wonderful thing for a father to do? He took me to Egypt because I wanted to go to Egypt, and I was 9. And, that's... And one thing about the picture of us in front of the pyramids is people ask now, they say, why is that man wearing a coat and tie in the middle of the desert? I say, well, people did back in the 1950s. I mean, that's how people dressed. Nobody remembers that. But that really got me. I mean, I think that was really why I've always been wedded to ancient history. I love it.
So at what point, Margaret, you knew from early on that you were going to be a writer and a storyteller. At what point did you realize this was a serious endeavor, and get started telling these epic tales that you do now?
Well, that I came to that fairly late because I love to write, but I had written a lot of other kind of books that never got anywhere. I mean, I would try to get them published, but I suddenly got this idea about Henry VIII when I went to Hampton Court, and I saw they were having the costumes on display from the filming of that BBC series about he and his wives, and I realized that we know all, because they had a lot of stuff. There was things about Catherine Howard at Hampton Court, and I realized that she was in many ways a replay of Anne Boleyn. It was like Vertigo, and where Henry tried to relive the Anne Boleyn episode and have it turn out differently, only it didn't. And that's what the book was supposed to be about originally. But then I realized I couldn't tell the story of Catherine Howard really in a vacuum. I mean, you had to know everything that came before it. And so it eventually evolved into a life story of Henry VIII. And that's when I really became serious about it, because I went to a history professor and I got a reading list, and I was older then. I mean, I was a teenager when I was writing other things, but now I was old enough to really, make a real credible project out of it.
Well, let me ask you this, Margaret, because we do have all these assumptions about history and about the way things played out, and the farther we get away from a historical event, things get distilled down into these nuggets and sound bites, if you will, and really caricatures of people. And when you start digging and really getting down to what the true facts are, how do you then decide where the narrative thread is to start telling the story and to kind of upset the things that we think we know?
Well, I think you have to begin with the basic histories. And again, I don't do primary research. I'm really not qualified to do that. But you have the translations. The lucky thing about ancient literature is it's all in translation. There isn't all that much of it, so it's been translated into English and all the other languages. And you got to start with that, even though it's not completely reliable. There are holes in it. And, of course, you had fake news back then, too. But we really did, especially, their things are biased just because it was written 2,000 years ago. And a lot of the favorable histories of Nero were lost. We know that there were favorable ones because one other historian mentions them, but they're lost. So, by the time you finish reading those, you have a pretty good kind of a timeline about his life. And, of course, so many of these soundbite things were just one instance in his life. And so, you start trying to weave those things together. But some things are kind of indelible, like the fiddling while Rome burns. I mean, there's been a zillion cartoons. How many cartoons? If you go online and you put in Nero images and you come up with all these cartoons with various and sundry American presidents, decked out in a toga, fiddling from both parties, And so it almost was like it's too good a soundbite to let go, but it really isn't true.
Right. Well, you have written quite a number of these historical fictions, but that read like memoir or read like an autobiography of these characters. You mentioned Henry VIII. There's also, you did the Confessions of Young Nero, which was the precursor to this new book. Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, Elizabeth I. A number of these. How do you, well, first off, when historical fiction is really popular right now, when you began, was there as much of a market and a desire for these kinds of books as there are now?
No, there wasn't. In fact, my editor that acquired Henry VIII said she bought it because she loved it, but she said, who reads biographical fiction anymore? It used to be Irving Stone that was that author that did so many, the Agony and the Ecstasy, but he had died some time ago, and trying to read him today, his books are very dense. But that whole genre had kind of fallen out of fashion. So it was a surprise to everybody, including me and the publisher, that people were so ready for another round of this kind of a book. And I chose to write in the first person because, and that was out of favor then too. If you took any writing course, they would tell you, no, not the first person. That's passé. Of course, now it's all come back in. Everything comes back again.
Of course it does.
But I thought, everybody knows what the person did. But what you want to know is why. I mean, we know about the 6 wives. We know about Rome burning. We know about Cleopatra and the asp. But what you want to know is what was going through their heads. So a lot of people still want to tell things from a distance. Like there were no first-person novels about Nero. In fact, when there was a first-person one more recently, it's told from Seneca's nephew's point of view. And so, again, you're just getting somebody standing on looking at Nero, trying to guess what he's thinking. And I just think the value of it for bringing the story to people is the one missing thing is what in the world was this person thinking?
Right. And how do you pick the subjects that you write about? You've got such a varied cast that your books have starred. When does or how does one kind of rise to the surface and you know what, there's a story here that people don't know?
Well, I think it's that, it took me a long time to find a common denominator in them. Because like you, I would ask myself that question because a character would just sort of seem to be calling out. But I realized that they all had to have operatic lives. I mean, they all, because I don't have an operatic life, so I'm drawn to them.
Very few of us do, Margaret.
I know. So, but when I thought about it, okay, of the people I chose, like Mary Queen of Scots was executed. Cleopatra and Nero commit suicide. And Helen of Troy starts a war and burns down Troy. And I thought, all these people really were so influential in history. And also they lived shorter lives. So people, I kept thinking, everybody I write about, their lives are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Henry was 56, and then Mary Queen of Scots was 44, and then Cleopatra was 39. I thought, well, there's Alexander the Great, he was younger, and then there's Joan of Arc. You keep going down and down, but I must be drawn to that kind of, because they were all kind of tragic figures, too. I mean, I don't think any of them lived happy lives. And, that's why people will suggest, what about so-and-so? And you think, yes, but she didn't end in tragedy. So maybe it's the Shakespearean thing. I don't know.
Well, there's that. When you pick a character like Nero, what was the initial fascination for you with Nero? Because, like we mentioned earlier, I don't think I've ever met anyone who has a favorable opinion of Nero.
I know.
And so what was the initial draw for you, and how did you did you know, or did you just did you have an inkling that there was something deeper there for Nero? What started you to research him that brought this about?
Well, I had done, I did, and Cleopatra, I did,
right.
I did have Roman characters, and they were both ancestors of Nero, Octavian and Antony, descended from both of them. But I think I saw in Nero a fellow artist, because he seemed so modern to me in the sense that his true calling, or his identity, his self-identity, was as an artist, especially as a musician. And so he reminded me he had this great tension between his duty as an emperor and his desire and feeling that his true self was as an artist. And some philosophers talk about the false self and the real self. And so he reminded me so many people today. That's what I mean about being modern. They want to be writers. They want to be filmmakers. They want to be musicians. And what do their parents do? But they say, "I'm sorry, it's just totally impractical. I won't pay for that. I want you to go to law school." And in a way that happened to me, because my mother said, you really should, she said, you should stick with science. She said, you're good in science. You should major in biology, and you can always get a job in a lab. She said, forget about English literature. And so I actually did that. I did major in biology. I was good in science. I am good in science. I had a double major in English literature and science, and I became a science writer for a while. So I think I felt
nice.
I understood about Nero. On a much smaller scale, I understood about Nero. And to me, it wasn't a joke that he wanted to be an artist. I mean, it wasn't a joke at all. I think people, he got a reputation now as, his music was obviously terrible. He was obviously not an artist. And that's really,
right.
How do we know that's true? Just because he was an emperor doesn't mean he had no other talents. So anyway, I think there was this great identification with him on my part. And now I am a writer. I did better with my art than Nero did with his, because I didn't get driven off the throne. And I don't have to do biology labs anymore.
Yeah, well, and his Amazon reviews are much lower than yours. Oh, Margaret, when you first started researching Nero and really digging into who the real Nero was, where do you begin? Because like we've said, the consensus is that he's this horrible person. He's vain. There's nothing good about him. He oppresses people and all of this stuff. Where do you start looking for contrarian views to what the kind of understood, passed down legacy of Nero is?
Well, I think you have to read the three main surviving sources with an open mind and just read it, say, okay, because you have to start with, okay, what are his enemies saying about him, and what is in here, and then you have to apply your own ideas about it, but you also have to rely on some modern historians that are, very good at being able to analyze these things, which I'm not. And there are some books out by modern historians, especially one by a man named Edward Champlain, who has written a kind of revisionist biography of him, and that was really helpful to me because he really explored, the other side that you can look at it this way. And there's also a historian called Lacey Baldwin Smith that wrote a lot about Henry VIII, and he just said that you could. That if you shift the lighting a little bit, you see things in a whole different light, and you haven't changed the facts, but if you shift the lighting, you will find that you can see things in a different way. And so I think that that's what Edward Champlain did. He's a professor of classics at Princeton, and he wrote this, I think, very influential book that was greatly helpful. It's called Nero, and like a lot of people, he kind of fell under Nero's spell. He starts out by saying, "I'm not going to whitewash him. He wasn't a great guy. He was this, he was that," and then he goes on to do just the opposite of what he said because people fall under his spell, and even Tacitus. They say that who didn't like him at all, but Tacitus would try to write this sober thing about what was going on in Armenia with the troops and blah blah. He'd always come back to the odd things that Nero was doing because he was fascinated by his personality. So that's really what I had to do. But I had help from it's helped to have modern historians that also have been thinking about this.
Sure. You wrote one volume earlier, the Confessions of Young Nero, and then we pick up his story again in the new book, The Splendor Before the Dark. And when this book opens, and in the beginning, you go ahead and put that whole fiddling while Rome burns to rest. You just come out swinging with it. What was first off, how did Nero mature between these two books? How did he change for you? And why did you choose to just go ahead and open up like that?
Well, first of all, I even Tacitus, it's funny because all the things about the relief measures that he did is all right there in the Tacitus. That I didn't even have to imagine that. That was true. But I think that, it made him grow up. I mean, until the Great Fire of Rome, he hadn't really had a chance to exercise his emperorship, for any major project. And this really suddenly, like 70% of the city was destroyed. And so, he had to respond to that. And he really rose to the occasion very well. I mean, I said even Tacitus, who doesn't like him, has to admit that. But I think he was then he became disillusioned because people started blaming him for the fire. And I think that's the other thing is that, as I said, we had fake news even then, and also people always, conspiracy theories did not start with the grassy knoll. They go all the way back to Rome. And if there was a fire, it was somebody probably started it. And Nero is rebuilding Rome in this magnificent new way. Maybe he started it so he could rebuild it. I mean, instead of the other way around, that the fire had, gave him the opportunity to do it, but he didn't start the fire. His own recently renovated palace had burnt up too, so he would hardly have burnt down his own palace. But as we know, how can you get rid of the conspiracy theories? And you can't even do it now, where you have fact-checking things and all kinds of ways to verify or not verify, and you still have all the conspiracy theories. So he was saddled with that, and I think that really disillusioned him because, it was a real shock to him. And then on top of that, the people that felt alienated from him because of he didn't really like the aristocrats very much, and he didn't pay as much attention to them as he did to the common people, had a conspiracy against him, including people that were in his literary salon and his Praetorian guards, people he trusted utmost. It was even suspicion that Seneca was in on it. So, that really kind of did it for him. I think he really felt betrayed, and that hardened him.
Yeah.
That hardened him. The reputation of being a tyrant wasn't fair because it's true he did take revenge and after a trial and execute the people that tried to assassinate him. But I mean, what do you expect? I mean,
Right.
It hardly made him a tyrant.
Margaret, we love to look at history to try to help us make sense of the times that we live in now. Are there parallels? Are there analogs that come up between Nero and his time and maybe the things we're going through in the world now?
Well, I think, the thing that struck me about that is that as great a statesman and genius as Octavian was, who founded the Roman Empire, the one thing he could not settle was the succession, because since there had to be the pretense that Rome did not have an emperor with all control, therefore you couldn't have a royal family. Therefore you couldn't have a line of succession. And so, but you did have to be descended from either Octavian or his wife Livia. They had no children together, but they had children with other marriages. So you had a succession, but nobody could say there was a succession, and that's where you get all the poisonings and all the backstabbings and all the posturings. And I think today you have the same thing where there's this vying for power, and we have an electoral system, but certainly it can be manipulated and influenced as much as they could do in ancient Rome. We just do it through super PACs and ads and things like that, instead of all the whispering that they did in Rome. But I think the line of succession is still the main political tool, and the thing that both sides and all sides want to get their hands on. So yeah, I mean, with Nero, it was a big problem for him that he didn't have an heir. So, he had his only daughter died. So, and today, whenever an office is up for grabs, well, all hell breaks loose.
Right. Margaret, other than getting a new look at a controversial historical figure, what do you hope people take away from this book?
Well, I hope they would take away, again, a kinder look at Nero, but also to realize, we are so much a part of our circumstances. And, we may think we'll rise above them, and I'm the emperor, and I can go on an artistic tour of Greece, and I'll remake Rome and get them interested in Greek culture. We're in a way, there's only a limit as to what we can do. I mean, if the emperor can't do it, we ordinary people have even less chance to totally remake everything. In some ways, we're kind of a victim of, well, not quite fate, but it's harder than you think. You know what I mean? And I think we should give people their due that are trying, and realize that they can't work miracles.
Well, Margaret, the book, The Splendor Before the Dark, is a fascinating read. I'm happy that you wrote it. You really made me stop and think. I would hold the book down and I would go, really? Is this, wow, this is not what I thought. And it really challenged me to look at things, to shine the light, kind of in a different direction. And I really like that analogy. Margaret, if people are just learning about you and your work and want to learn more about you or connect with you, is there a place online they can do that?
There's a couple of them. I have my own website, and that's just www.margaretgeorge.com, which is all one word. I mean, Margaret George is all one word, and it's .com. And then on Facebook, I have an author page, and you could look for it there under Margaret George author, and it will come up. So I put the things that are happening recently on the Facebook, reviews or appearances or things, and then there's the background about me is on the website, and
Excellent.
And information about my other books and so on. It has photographs.
Excellent. We'll link to all of it in the show notes at hankgarner.com. Margaret, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, and I'm so glad that you loved Nero. he has a new modern partisan, or at least sympathizer.
Yeah, that's right.
At least sympathizer.
That's right. At least sympathizer. That's right. That's right. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. You can find archives of all of the shows at hankgarner.com, and when you're there, please subscribe. Up next is an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
His body broke free of its paralysis, and he stumbled forward, losing his balance. He fell down the slope towards the spot where they had been. His hand shot out unthinkingly, and he grabbed the corner of the black stone bridge. Hoofbeats. Pounding hoofbeats, coming closer. Coming up the road. Someone or something galloped towards him. The head of an emaciated horse burst from the gloom of the road. The rider was fumbling, out of control, without saddle or bridle, clutching at the white mane, kicking the beast across the hindquarters with his thin legs, his face a frozen mask of terror. He whipped around to look back over his shoulder. Something chased him. Something terrible. Jason spun away as the horse ran over him, spearing him through the chest with its iron-shod hooves. He was unhurt. The horse galloped upward and across the bridge, across strong timbers, rough-hewn and knot-holed. The rider wheeled the horse about, looking back from the far shore. He was wheezing. A sloppy white ruffle bobbed under his chin. His face was hopeful now. A familiar face, much like the one Jason saw every morning in the mirror. Something thundered up behind Jason, not with a clatter of hoofbeats, but with the teeth-rattling thunder of stone on stone. Ichabod, yes, of course, the man was Ichabod, wailed, and the sound of his terror echoed across the valley. The hot breath of a horse burned the back of Jason's neck. He stood frozen, unable to turn his head to see the thing behind him. He didn't want to. This was no ordinary vision. He felt with certainty that the rider behind him, no, the horseman behind him, knew he was there. Ichabod kicked his horse. It reared, brayed, and would have thrown him but for the fistfuls of its mane he clutched. Horse and rider spun in place on the far side of the bridge, disoriented. The horseman behind Jason laughed. A terrible, deep, cracking sound from all directions, like 1,000 axes chopping down the woods. Jason felt searing heat as a ball of flame whipped over his shoulder. A burning jack-o'-lantern arced across the bridge. Its maniacal face spun end over end. It grinned back at Jason for an instant, spun around and crashed into Ichabod's temple, knocking him from his horse and into the dust. The pumpkin careened upwards, exploding against the trees, shooting tendrils of flame up their trunks, igniting branches and showering the world with sparks and flaming leaves. Jason recoiled, fell to his knees, and threw his arms over his face. His lungs and heart pumped wildly. They slowed. He brought his arms down. The bridge was broken again. It was over.